A restaurant would probably charge you $20, $25 for a ceviche like this, but it's actually pretty easy to make at home. In fact, gorgeous raw fish dishes like this aren't just splurges that you can only have if you're ordering off a menu. And making sure that fish is safe to eat raw, it's a lot easier than you think. Everything else you do is just to make it taste better. I'm going to walk you through 3 raw fish preparations where the common denominator is starting with fresh fish. First up is a tuna bowl that's colorful, textured, and delicious. It's all about using heat, but not to cook the fish, rather just to help it absorb flavors better. I'm starting by making a marinade for my fish. What I need is seasoned rice wine vinegar, soy sauce, some fresh ginger, and some sugar. Before I put together this marinade, let's talk about buying fish. For the safest and tastiest results, you need to start with fresh tuna. Now, I don't mean you have to find tuna that was swimming yesterday in the ocean. For the vast majority of us in the US, our fish comes from big commercial operations. It was caught at sea, flash frozen at sea, and producers have figured out how to make sure that freezing has minimal impact on the texture. Commercial freezing gets the fish cold enough to kill almost all of the parasites present, which is great for fish that's going to be consumed raw. I've got a pound of beautiful tuna here, and I know it's fresh because I have to get up pretty close to smell anything. It's faint, but it's a little bit oceany, it's savory and meaty. The surest way to make sure your fish is fresh is actually to buy frozen and defrost it yourself. You want to look for vac-sealed packages without visible frost or air bubbles, or buy your fish from a fish counter and ask the person behind the counter to let you smell the fish. You should have to get up really close before you get a whiff of that faint, salty, savory aroma. So I'm going to start my marinade by peeling and grating some fresh ginger. Okay, that's our marinade. One other shopping note. When it comes to labels, I don't really rely on sushi grade or fresh. Sushi grade is a marketing term that people define differently, and while the FDA requires anything labeled fresh to have never been frozen, it doesn't actually tell you how long that fish has been sitting around. It's really important to have a conversation with the person selling the fish to figure out how old that fish actually is. So I have a pot of boiling water here, and I'm going to add my tuna and count to 5. 5 seconds is all it takes to evenly cook the tuna on all sides. And to stop that cooking, I want to transfer it to the marinade and give it a quick turn to make sure this fish is coated on all sides. Hot water blanching is a technique used by many sushi chefs. Heat firms up the surface of the fish and it creates a nice contrast in texture between the interior and the exterior. It also makes the outside of the fish more porous so that it can absorb flavors. A lot of cooks will sear the outside of tuna, but blanching is a lot faster and easier because you don't have to time the cook on each side to make sure it's even. Plus, there's no greasy splatter or smoke, and you end up with fresher tasting fish. This is going to go in the fridge until I'm ready to plate. So while that tuna marinates, I'm going to use the same blanching water to cook some spinach. It's just going to take a couple seconds for the spinach to turn bright green, and then I'll stop that cooking by rinsing it under cold water. So now that the spinach is blanched and dry, I want to just spread it out so I can season it up evenly. For seasoning, I've got some toasted sesame oil, little minced garlic, some salt, and some sugar. I just want to give this a quick toss and then it'll be ready to go. So this tuna has been marinating for 15 minutes, but it can go for as little as 5 or up to 30. I'm going to pull it out and we'll set this marinade aside. So we're going to cut this up into 1/2-inch size pieces. You don't have to be exact for this, but if you want to have nice, clean, neat looking blocks, the trick is to use a sharp knife and to never push straight down. When you push down, even if you have a really sharp knife, the fish is going to kind of squidge and compress and you end up with kind of wavy looking cuts. You want to start slicing at the heel of the knife, and so you set it up here, and then instead of pushing down, you're going to pull the knife through. It looks something like this. You get really nice, neat, clean lines, and you just want to keep going. And you can see how that blanching gets you a really even cook all the way around without any effort. When I wrote this recipe, I specified 3/4 inch thick slices of tuna. I feel like that gets you a nice ratio of marinated exterior to raw interior. Of course, it's not always possible to find tuna that's the perfect thickness. If you can only find steaks that are 1 inch thick, which is kind of what these are, don't try to cut them in half in order to get closer to the spec. You're going to have a hard time doing it evenly. Instead, just go with it and make sure that you use generous amounts of that marinade to get the right flavor. Because these pieces are shorter, I don't have to start quite as far down the end of my knife. I can start right around here, but you can see that I'm pulling the knife through rather than pushing straight down. And if you're finding that you're having trouble doing this with your knife, probably needs to be sharpened, but to make things easier, just do one slice of fish at a time instead of trying to slice through a couple. All right, that's it. Let's build a bowl. So I have some seasoned sushi rice here. By the way, do you have any interest in a video about cooking rice? Let me know what your questions are in the comments. So this rice was steamed and then tossed with seasoned rice wine vinegar. On top of that, I'm going to place about 1/4 of the spinach. This is enough to serve 4. And you can really plate it up however you want. There's not really a right or wrong here. And then we've got some cucumber. I also like this dish with radishes. Sometimes I'll throw some thinly sliced sheets of egg. I like a little bit of a pickle element. This is pickled daikon, but you can use other Japanese pickles if you'd like. Pickled ginger is actually really good with this dish. Finally, we have our tuna. And then that dressing. You don't have to drizzle the dressing on top of the fish. You can actually just put it in a little bowl and pass it around and let people dress it to their taste. But I really like how gingery it is. And then finally, just for a little bit of nuttiness and crunch, some sesame seeds. All right, I'm diving in. I want a little bit of tuna and maybe some spinach. I could eat some version of this for lunch every day and be perfectly happy. That tuna is rich, it's meaty, it's got that beautiful density that raw tuna has, and then the marinade is just clinging to the surface. It's sweet, it's savory, it's super gingery, fantastic. So a little heat helps the tuna absorb marinades better. Let's see what acids can do for fish. Ceviche is a classic preparation used in parts of Latin America where the fish is cooked with an acid, usually citrus juice. We'll get to exactly what the acid does and what it doesn't do, but first I want to start Andrew Janjigian's red snapper ceviche with radishes and orange. I've got a pound of red snapper here, it's been skinned, and I'm going to divide it lengthwise into about 1/2 inch wide strips. Now, the fish has natural seams, and I'm going to stick with those where I can, which is going to mean doing this. And then go right here. You'll notice that on the skin side, you're going to see deep red portions. That's referred to as the bloodline. It tends to be really minerally tasting, and I want something a little bit fresher than that here, so I'm going to trim it off and get rid of it. Now that we have our cleaned up fish, I just want to cut this into 1/8 inch thick pieces. You'll notice that some of these pieces are a little bit straggly and falling apart. That's okay. We'll save the nicer looking pieces for our ceviche. So pieces like this. And then when you're cutting your fish, to get the prettiest looking pieces, you don't want to push straight down. You want to start with the heel of your knife on the fish and then pushing down lightly as you pull the knife through. If it's more comfortable, you can also start with the tip of your knife on the fish and push forward. So long as you're not pushing straight down, you're going to get nice looking slices. So those straggly bits I was talking about, you want to reserve about 1/3 of a cup of them. We're going to actually use them for making the marinade. Now, if you can't find snapper, you can use halibut, grouper, or any other firm, flaky whitefish. Just avoid freshwater fish for raw preparations because they're more prone to carrying parasites. I want to make sure this is nicely seasoned. I'm going to take my fish, spread it out. I'm adding some salt and give this a nice toss. So we'll let the salt work its way in, season the fish while we're making our marinade. Also, I'm going to wash my hands. Some people marinate their ceviche in straight citrus juice. Usually it's lemon or lime, but you might see something like orange juice or grapefruit juice or tangerine juice mixed in. Others use a citrus-based emulsion called leche de tigre, which is what I'm going to do here. It's a Peruvian style. First in is that fish scrap I saved. The protein from the fish is the thing that's going to keep the emulsion stable. Next up, some salt for seasoning. And then my lime juice, a really generous amount of it. For richness, a little extra virgin olive oil. This is why we need the fish. Otherwise, the oil would just float to the top. For a little bit of heat, ají amarillo paste. And then last up, 2 garlic cloves. 1, 2. We'll pop a lid on and blend it up until it's nice and smooth and creamy. Okay, nice and smooth. So I want to strain this. So I've got my leche de tigre. I'm going to add my fish to this. And along with that fish, I have orange segments and sliced radishes. We'll give this a quick toss to make sure everything is well coated. So I'm going to wrap this up in plastic and pop it in the fridge for about half an hour. People often say that the acid cooks the fish, but that's not quite accurate. Like heat, acid denatures the fish proteins so that they uncoil and straighten out and then knit themselves together. This causes the fish to firm up and become a little bit opaque. What the acid is not doing is killing pathogens to make the fish food safe. And that's generally okay, because if you've got a high quality commercially frozen fish that's been kept cold after defrosting, most bacteria that grow on that fish won't make you sick. But it's not zero risk, and that's why people who are pregnant or immunocompromised should avoid raw fish or undercooked proteins. The marination time is how you control the flavor and the texture of your ceviche. The longer the fish sits in acid, the more of the marinade flavor it will absorb and the more firm and opaque it'll become. So you choose your marination time based on what you want the flavor and texture to be. I like my fish just slightly firm, but if you want something a little bit more opaque and a little firmer, go for about 45 minutes to an hour instead of half an hour. You could leave it in there longer, but eventually the surface of the fish, it becomes kind of chalky. So this is marinated for 30 minutes, and I'm going to stir in a little bit of cilantro, and then we'll serve it up. One of my favorite things about this dish is the garnishes. There's a little bit of extra virgin olive oil for some richness, but much more fun are corn nuts. They're so crunchy, and it's a great contrast with the silky fish. And then last up, popcorn. When you serve this, you actually want to just put a couple of pieces on to let people know that popcorn is the garnish, but leave the rest in a bowl and let folks add more as they eat. Okay, time to taste. It's so good. That fish, it's silky, it's a little bit salty, it's very savory, and then you get that creamy, rich leche de tigre. It's so refreshing, it just pops, and the corn nuts are super fun too. You wouldn't normally think of popcorn as sweet, but next to that bright, limey, lightly spicy leche de tigre, it is a little bit sweet. It's so fun. If you want to make this, and I really think you should, use the link below or hop onto the ATK app and search ceviche. You're going to find this recipe along with variations using either shrimp or scallop. So that's acids. Last up, let's take a quick look at how salt treatments work on fish. Curing is all about giving salt enough time to penetrate food and change its flavor and structure. Gravlax is a really great example of this. It's a hands-off preparation that takes a little advanced planning, but If you're hosting a party, it's a really easy make-ahead dish and a crowd pleaser. I'm making Morgan Bowling's DIY gravlax, and all I'm doing is coating a salmon fillet with a mixture of salt, brown sugar, and dill. This salmon fillet is 1.5 inches thick, and it's especially important to start with fish that was commercially frozen, since salmon lives both in freshwater and saltwater. Curing the fish in a Ziploc bag is space efficient, and it keeps the rub and fish contained. The bag goes on a rimmed baking sheet, and then I want to weigh it down by putting a pan on top and then a couple of heavy cans in the pan. This whole setup goes in the fridge to cure for about 3 days. While it's in the fridge, the salt's doing a couple of things. One, it's drawing moisture out of the fish that concentrates flavor and fat, and it also preserves the salmon by creating a low moisture environment that's inhospitable to bacterial growth. Two, it's also changing the protein structure, so you get this really dense, firm, but silky texture, and it's not just going to be on the surface of the fish, but it'll be all the way through the salmon. The unique thing about salt is that it works slowly. Heat and acid force the proteins to uncoil and tangle pretty quickly, which is why they make the surface opaque and dry. But salt acts gradually on proteins and transforms them into a translucent, water-retaining gel. So this is what it looks like after 3 days of curing. So I'm going to scrape off all of the cure that we don't need anymore. Now I want to go to the sink and give this a quick rinse. After you rinse, you want to pat dry, and then we're ready to slice. So when you go to slice the fish, the goal is to get nice, thin, wide, almost translucent pieces that are going to drape really nicely. We're going to start by dividing this in half so we have pieces that are narrower and easier to slice through for our chef's knife. Salmon is going to have a natural seam right here, and that's the seam I'm going to use rather than cutting it in half perfectly, which would be probably right around here. I want to use this seam because the fish is going to naturally separate right there. So we'll turn it and just follow. Gravlax is going to keep best unsliced, and so anything that I'm not serving, I'm going to wrap up and stick in the fridge. When it comes to slicing, I like to set my knife not perpendicular to the fish, but at a 45-degree angle. And this first slice, it's okay to take off a little bit too much to kind of establish the shape. I want to start with the heel of my knife on the fish, and I'll pull it through this way. So as you're slicing, it's not important to get a full slice off in one swipe of the knife. It's okay to get halfway through, stop, reset the knife, and then finish slicing. It's going to look a little bit like this. So as you're slicing, bits of fish protein are going to build up on the knife, and that'll make the knife stick to the fish. You want to give your knife a quick wipe with a damp towel. Every couple of slices, it'll make the whole process a lot easier. So I've got a platter set up here with pumpernickel, red onions, radishes, creme fraiche, capers, dill, but really this could be great in a bagel with cream cheese, tomato, and cucumber, or you could even finely chop it, stir in a little bit of sour cream, mustard, and chive, and have cured salmon tartare. So I'm going to build myself a bite. I'll start with a little bit of bread, nice schmoo of creme fraiche, and we'll have a nice piece of salmon. Actually going to rip this in half so I can take a nice bite. I'm absolutely the guest who builds like a perfect looking bite before I eat it. All right, let's give this a try. That was so good. The cure is so perfect on this. It's really well seasoned, but not salty. And the texture, it's the standout. It's rich, it's dense, it's silky and luxurious. So good. Whether it's a tuna bowl, ceviche, or this gravlax, I hope it's clear that you can make delicious raw fish dishes at home. If you try any of these recipes, hop in the comments and let me know what you think.